What's up, YouTube fanatics? Hope you're all doing well. If you noticed from the stream title, maybe from Twitter, Twitch, something like that, I did manage to win a local RCQ, or like split the finals of a 2-invite RCQ. And so I'm going to do a video here kind of going through a bit of a tournament recap. We're going to go over the list I chose, why I made some of the choices I did, break down some of the changes I would make going forward, go over all the matches, any interesting decision points, and hopefully give you some good information to take with you into your next RCQ if you're planning on running Demir, and maybe help you finalize some of those last few spots in your list so you can take down the win. So just remember, if you're enjoying this kind of content, feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, greatly helps the growth, and let me know what kind of stuff y'all are interested in. And without further ado, let's break down the list a little bit. All right, so the list that you see on the screen right now is the exact 75 that I did run. We'll kind of show some changes towards the end of it. But I figure for at least the initial introduction, we'll go through the list from like your left to right, break down some of the card choices, some things that I thought about as I was picking these last few flex spots. So the mana base, 18 lands, pretty standard, really no changes there. The 10 fetches, 2 islands, swamp, dark slick shores, couple undercity, couple water graves. Usually always running Dark Slick Shore if I'm running Thoughtseize in the main deck. But other than that, pretty standard. So kind of skip past that part. The 1-drop slot here, this 19 row drop down here. The Considers over the Preordain for a couple reasons. One, the instant speed aspect is a lot better when like prowess is a big part of the meta, because I'm wanting the ability to interact with all of my mana available on my opponent's turn, and then cantrip if I don't need to, reset on my turn, maybe deploy a threat, and pass back with the most amount of mana possible. So consider letting me interact, or letting me cantrip on my opponent's instep if they don't go for like a Quarry Steel, but holding up counterspell in case they do is a really big deal. Preordain has felt a little inconsistent recently. I find myself more often than not like keeping a 1-lander or keeping a 2-lander and wanting to preordain to find a second land. And if I miss, then I'm tapping off of, say, Counterspell or Frog or a 1-mana piece of interaction, something like that, to cast that preordain at sorcery speed, where I could just miss my second land drop or miss my third land drop, hold up Consider if I need to, and still have Counterspell without like really missing tempo. So that's why I've been on Consider instead of Preordain. 3 spell snares and the Stubborn Denial. Snares have been hit or miss, honestly. I think every deck, for the most part, has a target for snare outside of some of the affinity builds and some builds of Amulet Titan. But when it's good, it's really good. When it's bad, it's really bad. I think it's the most hit or miss card in the main deck, in my opinion. Kind of feast or famine. But I was going into a room expecting a lot of prowess and Boros, and was kind of on point with that guess. So I did add the 3rd spell snare, make sure I had the 3rd spell snare. Stubborn Denial has been really, really interesting and really solid for me. So the only enablers we have for Stub are Psychic Frog and Murktide, but both of them are very, very easy to get to 4 power. Psychic Frog with like just discard a few cards that are dead in the matchup, have Stubborn Denial up. A lot of times when you want Stubborn Denial, you're okay with ditching some dead stuff, like some dead removal spells, to have a hard negate in your hand. And then Murktide, pretty much anytime you cast it, Stubborn Denial is going to be online. So just having a 1-mana Force of Negation effectively in the early game, when you can just use it as a force spike against like a turn 2 Quarry Steel, or had like a Stubborn Denial on a Spelunking and a Amulet, something like that. or have it go into the late game and not need to pay either 3 mana to hardcast Force or ditch a card for it to be cheaper. So like those turn 3s, it's a really, really good bridge counterspell to let you play out a threat for 2 mana and then hold up that 3rd for Stubborn Denial. So I've really liked including it in the list as a little less of a card disadvantage counter compared to Force and Negation. The 3 Tamios, I would not read into this at all. Basically, Friday night, I was putting together my list, or whatever night I was putting together my list. I decided I wanted to run some Tamios, and so I decided to put 3 in the list over extra Stubborn Denials or extra cantrips in the form of Preordain. Spoiler alert, Tamiyo basically did nothing the entire tournament. I think I cast it 4 times. Once or twice were in like complete garbage time. Once it made a clue, then got fatal pushed, and I don't think I ever cracked the clue. And then once it got solituded immediately. And you could argue that solitude could have hit the Psychic Frog. I think that's a reasonable argument, but the Tamiyo itself was just like a lightning rod that didn't actively advance the board, but I really wanted to have like another thing that affected the battlefield. And so I chose for the Tamiyo there. The Blood Chief's Thirst, along with the 4 fatal pushes. I like having the 5 pieces of 1 mana interaction. Dismember could be considered the 1 mana interaction. That's fine. But Blood Chief's Thirst, being able to take out like an opposing Murktide, or I wanted one more way of answering Flage. Blood Chief's Thirst covers that while also being applicable into a turn 1 Ragavan or Ocelot, turn 2 Voice of Victory. The Cling to Dust, just cantrip number 5, along with the 4 Consider, helps flip Tamiyo if you got that going on. A little bit of grave interaction isn't the worst thing when Prowess needs Delirium, when Boros has Flage, when opposing Murktide decks and Unearthed decks exist. It's just like a little cantrip with upside. Definitely cast it 5-6 times over the course of the day. It was just a redraw every time. I don't think there was any point where I actively got to disrupt a graveyard strategy because of it. But just as an instant speed cantrip, it was perfectly fine. Did escape it a couple times. So there were at least 2 instances of it being like a cantrip plus another cantrip in this point. And then the 2 Thoughtseize. I've been toying from 2 to 4, and I find myself never wanting them against anything that's not Eldrazi. And I didn't see a lot of Eldrazi in the room, so I cut from 3 down to 4, or 3 down to 2, sorry. And saw a lot of Boros Prowess, didn't want to have an extensive amount of Thoughtseize, and really didn't want to change anything in my sideboard to move them to the board. So kept them in the main and just decided to run with the 2 there. The 2 mana slots, 4 Counterspell, pretty stock, 4 Psychic Frog, pretty stock, so I'm not going to talk about those much. The Orcish Bowmasters, I think if you're expecting a lot of Boros, Bowmaster's really good. Not very good into Prowess. I get that it can kill a Dragon's Rage Channeler without Delirium, but as soon as that Channeler has Delirium or they have a mutagenic growth or something like that, it just blows Bowmaster out of the water. So I wouldn't consider it very good in the matchup overall. Didn't see any like Hollow One or anything. I think there was 1 Jeskai control in the room. But ultimately wouldn't have been a great environment for Bowmaster, but I feel like the threat density just gets a little too light if you cut them. And the Shoot the Sheriff, just expecting some amount of opposing Murktide. And again, kind of like the Blood Chief's Thirst, wanting an extra answer to Flage. Shoot did end up overperforming. I got to, spoiler alert before I get to the matchup breakdowns, I did get to win a game off of Shoot the Sheriff on a Primeval Titan in response to hasting it up. I think I saw it against Orzhov a good bit, which is a cool matchup to see it since Solitude exists. But just having like a catch-all removal spell I think's pretty nice. And I didn't even realize until, I want to say like Wednesday on stream last week, that Slick Shot Show Off is not an outlaw. So it does hit like everything in prowess very well. So cool little addition there. In the 3 mana slots, 3 force, 2 sync. I feel like I've been on 3 force forever. 2 sync. You could go up to 3. I've played up to 3 with the 3rd or 21st mana source, but having the 4 Consider and the Cling to Dust, and we'll get to the 5 mana tech in a second. But having the extra land slots, I feel like I don't need the 3rd sync as much. The Dismember, I knew there were at least 3 Orzhov players in the room. I didn't know if they were on Ketchermos or not, but elected to throw a Dismember in here just to make sure I had that out. I've also lost 2 trophies in the first round of a challenge in the last like 3 days to Orzhov, just not having answers to like Ketchermos or Hardcast Solitude. So I wanted that extra like security blanket removal spell in there. And then the last column over here is kind of like the 5+. The 5+ that you never cast for 5. The 3 Murktide I think are pretty self-explanatory. If you're playing traditional, I would never play less than 3. You could go up to 4 if you want to up the cantrip count, but 3 I think is like a good number to find them when they're big enough to impact the board. And then this cheeky little sorcery up here. Lorien Revealed. I'm sure a bunch of you know this card from when the Rhinos decks were kind of running rampant in Modern. The Island Cycler from the Lord of the Rings set. 1 colorless to cycle to find any island, which like Undercity Sewers is an island. Watery Grave is an island. Your basic island's an island. And then you can pay 3 and 2 blue to draw 3 cards. I have had the full cost come up several times and have gotten to draw the cards, and it does feel pretty good. The cycling part, really, really underrated. If you already have the lands, you don't have to cycle it, and you can wait to hard cast it. You're usually interacting pretty well in those turns between like 2 and 5 to try to close out the game, try to get ahead. But the island cycling 100% saved me on 2 or 3 separate occasions where I kept a 1-lander with like a Dark Slick Shores or I know I won a game where I kept a 1-lander with a Sink into Stupor and just cycled for like an Undercity Sewers and got to go turn 1 sink, hold up interaction. They didn't do anything. Cycle for an Undercity, play the Undercity, pass, turn 2 they played Sling, and I got to like Spell Snare or Stern Scolding and keep tempo while surveilling a 3rd land to the top of my deck. So that was really, really cool. There were several occasions where I was on like 3 mana, had a Lorien Revealed in hand, and was able to just cycle it and find the 4th land for free, staying at like that 3 mana point. So I could play out a Frog, hold up Stub, play out a Murktide, hold up Snare, or just wait until the next turn to guarantee I could play out a Murktide and hold up Counterspell. So I do think Lorien Revealed like showed up a lot better than I thought it was going to. In the sideboard, 2 copies of Harbinger of the Seas. I know there are plenty of lists that are running them in the main deck. I'm really not a fan of the main deck Harbinger. Maybe like 1 if you're on Unearth Oculus. But if you're not on Oculus, not on Unearth, I do not like the main deck ones. If you're just dead set on playing them, go for it. But I think in a Prowess Boros metagame, they're just not impactful enough, a little slow and clunky. 3 Stern Scoldings, again, expecting extra copies of Boros and Prowess, so chose to run the third. 4 Consigned to Memory, 1 Toxic Deluge. The Toxic Deluge and the Engineered Explosives. EE, because I saw a lot of Prowess in the room and wanted an out to a Resolved Quarry Steel Cutter. So that was the reasoning there. Toxic Deluge because of the Boros. I decided to run a sweeper. And Deluge is usually my sweeper of choice because I do not want to get Blood Mooned off of my sweeper. I do not want my opponent to be able to Blood Moon and stop like Path to Peril or Meat Hook Massacre, Glistening Deluge, something like that. So at least Toxic Deluge, I can cast through one of those. 2 Kaito for the mirror match for any of the Orzhov players in the room. If I did happen to run into any control, I just think Kaito is like a really versatile sideboard juke when the Grave Hate's coming out. And then 2 Nihil Spellbomb. Again, expecting a bunch of Flage. I've seen a lot of Dimir at previous RCQs, so kind of wanted that out in case there was a lot of Dimir that I didn't notice. But yeah, I kind of called the room correctly. There was a lot of Prowess, a few Boros, a lot of Amulet Titan, but obviously, if you've seen the Twitter report, I did not run into any of the Prowess. So let's get into the matchups so I can talk about what I did run into. And the matchups. So I've got my like handy dandy notes written out to remind me what my matchups were. But we'll kind of go over like not only what the matchups were, how they played out a little bit, the sideboarding for them, some things, if there were any interesting lines or anything I took away from the match that I might not have known before. I'll try to pass along that information as we go. First off, it was a 35-person RCQ, so it ended up being 6 rounds of Swiss, then cut to top 8. The first round, I knew there were 3 Orzhov players in the room. It's our worst matchup by a mile, especially if they're on the Aether Vial version. So, of course, round 1, I find Orzhov Aether Vial. Game 1, kind of funny. I win the die roll. I think I mulled to 6. I really wanted a hand with a turn 1 answer or turn 2 answer to a Baelmerc. And so I mulliganed an opener that I want to say had like Murktide, Bowmaster, 1 single land, Fatal Push, Force, Spell Snare, something like that. Because it didn't have an answer to a Baelmerc. Second hand was a couple lands, Tamiyo, Consider, Counterspell, Force of Negation, something else. I was like, okay, it's got a Counterspell. I've got a Tamiyo on 1. Pretty good opener against Orzhov. So I play out the Tamiyo on 1 and pass. My opponent goes for a Fatal Push on the Tamiyo. I force the Fatal Push, and they Solitude the Tamiyo afterwards. So we're already both down to like 4 cards in hand after turn 1. Turn 2, I play second land, pass, and I think my hand is Consider, or no, I must have mulled to like 5 because my hand at this point is Consider, Counterspell, and 2 lands in play, and that's it. Opponent untaps, plays their second land, and goes for a Thoughtseize. And I'm like, okay, well, it's not a Baelmerc, that's a plus. They take my Counterspell, pass. I fetch up into turn, Surveil trigger on the stack, cast a Consider, see a Murktide, draw into it. Surveil over some instant or sorcerer like a Sink into Stupor, untap, find another Sink, I think, play out a Murktide, and just like, all right, this is my plan. I think it's like a 6/6 Murktide. and it ends up going the distance. They don't find an answer to it. The Tameo being the lightning rod for the Solitude did end up mattering, because then they couldn't Solitude my Murktide. I don't know what was in their hand. I just know they didn't get there from there. Games 2 and 3 went like almost identical to each other. So game 2, or sideboarding for Orzhov, let's get that out of the way real quick. Against the Aether Vial versions, I'm really, really heavy on cutting a bunch of counters. So like I'm cutting Force completely, cutting Stub, usually cutting like a couple copies of Counterspell on the draw. I'll bring them back in on the play, but on the draw, they're too slow against Overlord. And then like a couple copies of Spell Snare, something like that. Bringing in Stern Scoldings, because they're really good against Evoke Solitudes. Let's see, make sure y'all can see this. Bringing in Consign to Memories. A lot of times, like all 4 consigns. Sometimes 3. It depends on if they're more like Emperor of Bones heavy or Ketchermos heavy, or if they're more Recruiter of the Guard heavy, Aven Interrupter, stuff like that. If they're more ETB trigger heavy, I'll bring the 4th consign. If they're not, I'll just leave it at 3. And then Toxic Deluge. And then my last couple cuts are usually something like maybe Bowmaster on the draw. Depends on how much they're respecting Kaito. Can trim a Murktide, that's fine. Can trim the 4th or 3rd Spell Snare. It's a little bit of flexibility with like the 9th and 10th board outs. I wouldn't worry about them too much. Just kind of play around with what fits your play style and what feels good. But I do think like Graveyard Hate is a little overrated in my mind against Overlord. You can hit a Solitude that they might flip over into the yard to get back. Or like, if they evoke a Solitude early, you can Spellbomb that away and it feels fine, but you're playing the lottery with Overlord. They could always just flip over another one and there's nothing you can do about it. So since Grave Hate doesn't like actually shut everything down, I'm more inclined to just not board it in and not play the gamble game of whether or not it's actually going to be effective or not. I'd rather know what my cards are going to do. But games 2 and 3, I got a little land stuck on like 3 lands game 2 and 2 lands game 3, something like that. Both games I had Counterspell available for an Overlord. And I also had like Spell Snare, Stern Scolding, and my opponent on the end of my second turn, both games, went, I think game 2, they went for Ophelia. I let it go so I could hold up Counterspell for Overlord on their turn. And they didn't Overlord, just like attacked me for 2, passed back. They went for like a Bowmaster on the end of the next turn. I didn't have an extra land, so I let it resolve so I could hold up Counterspell for an Overlord. And then the end of their next turn, I went for like Bowmaster on their Bowmaster. They had Ephemerate. I wasn't expecting Ephemerate because that's usually one of the first cards that Orzhov boards out against us. And game 2 and 3 went through like the exact same pattern of letting some of the 2-drops go so that I could Counterspell an Overlord, getting a little stuck on mana so that I couldn't 1-drop plus Counterspell when I needed to, and my opponent never seeing an Overlord. They didn't see an Overlord all 3 games and just won games 2 and 3 with Felia, Bowmaster, Ephemerate beats. That was it. So definitely a little bit of a misinterpretation on my part, expecting my opponent to board out Ephemerate aggressively and me losing to it, as well as not adjusting how I probably should have for game 3, not playing the odds as much as I should have. Like, okay, if my opponent's got lands and they're Feliaing on turn 2, it means they probably don't have an Overlord, because they could have just played it out on their turn 2 when I had 1 mana up and couldn't really interact with it, and they didn't. So I should have taken that to mind and adjusted accordingly, and kind of didn't. So that first loss definitely on me for kind of playing with a predetermined frame of mind instead of adjusting in the moment. But like I said, games 2 and 3, almost the exact same of just Overlord, Bowmaster, Ephemerate, Felia, Loops, the occasional like Flicker Wisp in there to blink a blocker. And yeah, just got demolished games 2 and 3. Round 2, I looked at the pairings and I got the buy. And I know a lot of y'all are going to like stop watching the video now. Like, oh, you got to buy in a RCQ. The results don't matter anymore. But when you get a buy, you don't have anything to compare or anything to adjust your breakers that round. So if you're winning with the buy, your breakers get better. If you're losing with the buy, your breakers get worse. Or if you're winning with the buy, your breakers count more. So like being on the bubble with the buy is really bad for your breakers because you have less wins to compare to, because you have less opponents that you've played that can contribute to your win percentage. Complicated, stupid, don't like it, but that's the way it is. So got to buy round 2. Knew I needed to like win out from there to have any chance. Round 3, in the blind, didn't know what my opponent was on. I kept like a fairly balanced hand, and they turned out they were on Amulet Titan. So I got to like turn 2 a frog. I think I forced a negation to turn 1 Amulet. Turn 2 played a frog. Turn 3 started swinging in. I think they blocked with a Grazer and played like an Azusa turn 3. No. They just had a Grazer. Azusa was later. Like attack in with a Grazer. I think they got a Saga off, made a Construct, got another Amulet. And the game basically came down to me having Frog plus a Murktide on board. They had Titan mana. I didn't have a counterspell. They played Titan with a Spelunking out. Went and got the Handwear Battlements and Vesuva. Went to go haste up the Titan, and I had the one of Shoot the Sheriff to take the Titan out. Win game number 1. Game number 2 was, I guess, sideboarding against Amulet. Harbingers coming in. I brought in EE. It's good at taking out constructs, good at taking out the amulets themselves. Bring in all 4 consigned to memories. And a lot of times I'll bring in like 1, maybe 2 Stern Scoldings. It's good against Aftermath Analyst. You can hit Arboreal Grazer. You can hit Dryad of the Elysian Grove. So it does have some random targets that are nice to not let resolve. Sideboarding out. Force negation, I'll usually trim. Might cut all of them depending on if I think my opponent's like boarding out amulets. But if I think they're keeping amulets in, then I might keep like 2 force negation in. Bowmaster usually gets trimmed pretty heavy. 3, maybe all 4. It's just not fast enough at closing out the game. They're not drawing outside of if they're running Explore. But I do have a good number of answers to explore if they want it. So Bowmaster definitely gets a lot weaker. Spell Snare, pretty bad. If they're on Malevolent Rumble, I might leave in a Spell Snare or 2, because it does hit Aftermath Analyst. It hits Rumble, hits Explore. But I've got to see a certain number of 2-drops before I'm just going to leave in Spell Snare. And then I'll trim on like Blood Chief's Thirst and a Fatal Push, some of this cheap removal, because I don't really care if I don't want to have a dead card in my hand to kill an Arboreal Grazer when I could just attack into the Grazer anyway and get like the same job done, because I already want to grow the Frog. So 1 extra attack to like discard 2 and take out a Grazer. If it means I don't have to have Fatal Push or Bloodchief's Thirst in my hand is kind of fine. Or if you do have one, you end up like ditching it to the Frog a lot of times anyway. That's sideboarding against Amulet. The post-board game was kind of funny. I think it was like turn 1, they had land go. I had Tamiyo. They dismembered my Tamiyo. I was like, okay. My hand had double Thoughtseize at the time. So they go turn 2, play like a bounce land, pick up their first land. My turn 2, I Thoughtseize. They've got another dismember in hand, so I take that, pass back. They go for a spelunking, and I soft stub it, counter that. Go to turn 3. I think I've got like just land pass. They don't have a third land. They just have the bounce land, and I think it was like a Beseiju. And so they don't have a play, pass back. I top deck a Harbinger. So I'm like, 4th land, go get my swamp, play the Harbinger, pass. And like, I say something along the lines of, hope you don't find the 3rd dismember. And I pass back, and he goes, I'm going to pay 4 life and 3rd dismember on the Harbinger. So I was like, all right, cool. So we got all the dismembers out of the way. And we're going back and forth. He's like missing 3rd land drop a couple times. I'm finding more counter spells. And eventually I just find like a 2nd copy of Harbinger, play that out, and just like locks the game out. They have no real answer. He's looking for an Odawara, doesn't find it. And we're able to steal game 2, although nothing really exciting happened. So either way, at this point, I'm 1-1-1 going into round 4. Got to win out. Round 4 is the Dimir mirror. I know that my opponent's on Dimir, so expectations pretty high. Game 1 is the randomness of Dimir, where we both have like Tamiyo Psychic Frog, but I think he's got Fatal Push for Tamiyo, Spell Snare for Frog. I've got like a Bloodchief's Thirst for Tamiyo, no answer to the Frog. He ends up getting some chip shots in. I find a Bowmaster. He finds another Tamiyo, is able to flip it, and Tamiyo ult just like seals the deal. I can't find a Bowmaster in time. He's able to take up the Tamiyo. Game 2 was... see, I was on the play. I'm pretty sure game 2 was just like a back and forth resource. Oh no, I'm wrong. Game 1. Game 1 was he's got Frog Tamiyo. I've got Frog Tamiyo. We both kill each other's Tamiyo. He kills or counters my Frog, gets in some attacks, plays out like a 5/5 Murktide or something like that. I play out, I think, a 7/7 Murktide, and he attacks him with his Murktide. I think I'm at like 9 life. He's got 2 cards in hand, 1 instant or sorcery in the yard. He can grow his Murktide to trade with mine based off known information, but he can't kill me unless his last 2 cards in hand are instances, sorceries. And I say like no blocks because he can, again, kill my Murktide or trade with my Murktide. And then he's just left with a Frog on board, and I've got no board presence. So I say, if you got 2 instances of sorceries, you kill me, and he shows me like a Sauron's Ransom, and I want to say like a counter spell. So I'm like, all right, I'm dead. Scoop it up, go to game 2. Sideboarding against the mirror. Move some of this stuff. Stern Scolding, usually bringing in 2 if I don't see Bowmaster, Tamiyo, 3 if I do. So brought in all 3 because he had Bowmaster and Tamiyo. Bring in Kaito, bring in the 2 Nihil spell bombs. Sideboarding out, force negations, usually like the first cut. I don't want a 2-for-1 myself in the mirror. From here, it gets a little bit trickier. Like, I don't like Dismember against traditional Murktide with just Frog, Murktide, Bowmaster. It's a little bit better into Tameo, but it's still bad against the stuff that you're usually losing to. So I'll trim Dismember a lot of the times. If I'm on the draw, I might trim like a Psychic Frog because there's just so many more answers for it. But I'll keep them in on the play. Stubborn Denial can be a little sketchy. It doesn't help you resolve a threat, but it helps when you already have a threat resolved. So a little too situational. And then the last couple cuts, this might be where we get a little controversial in opinions. I don't think Thoughtseize is that good in the mirror. So I usually end up cutting it. Like, I do think it's cool to be able to take an opposing Murktide, but a lot of times it turns into a really bad top deck when you need to find a threat. And if I cut them, I feel like all of my spells can just be action spells. They're either counters, threats, removal, and that's it. Where Thoughtseize can situationally be bad. It can situationally be good, but the deck, for the most part, is like fairly redundant outside of exactly Murktide and answers to Murktide. So I don't feel like Thoughtseize is the most impactful thing a lot of the times. But you could also trim like Considers if you're up against opposing Bowmasters if you want to keep the Thoughtseize in. So don't think you have to do the exact same thing. That's just my thought process and how I come to that conclusion. But game 2 ended up with I got a like 7/7 or 6/6 Murktide, and he finally tapped down to 1 mana on some turn where I fought over I think a Frog on his turn. So it was like Frog, I counterspelled, he spell snared, I spell snared his Frog, something like that. Tapped down to 1 mana. I untapped, played a Murktide. He didn't have a Murktide of his own and didn't have an answer for it. So Murktide just killed in like 3 hits. And then game 3 was like a turbo Murk game where we had a couple like fights over a Bowmaster or something, Frog early. And I just played out like a 5/5 Murktide, and when he tapped down off of Counterspell, and it ran away with it. So kind of recognizing if your opponent is playing Mystical Dispute is real important. If they're not, and you can get your opponent to tap down for to 1 mana, 9 times out of 10, I would just slam the Murktide, like whatever size it is. The outs to it are usually 3, 4, 5 cards total in the 75. So if you're able to get it down, especially if you have like a Force of Negation or a Counterspell to fight over something like an opposing Murktide or an opposing Kaito, I would just get the Murktide on the battlefield when you know you can resolve it. We talked a little bit about the mirror afterwards, and it's always cool to hear differing opinions because for me personally, if Kaito wasn't in the sideboard, I think Bowmaster is horrendous in the mirror. I think so much it just doesn't matter. And I think my opponent had the opinion that Bowmaster is like top tier in the mirror. We didn't get enough time to really discuss reasonings, but I just thought it was interesting to see those differences in how matches have played out for everybody. Like, I think the Bowmaster ping doesn't matter. There's not really enough draw, and it doesn't do anything against Murktide, which is like what the mirror revolves around in my mind. But cool to see another opinion, and I'm assuming that it has worked out for them if they're choosing to play Murktide, so power to them. Round number 5, Brood Scale. Good old Brood Scale. So game 1, I'm on the draw. My opponent goes turn 1. I keep a 1-lander on the draw. 1-lander with a Lorien revealed. Opponent goes turn 1, land Blade of the Blood Chief. It was in the blind. I didn't know what they were on. I go to my turn, play out a Sink into Stupor, pass. They play turn 2, Brood Scale. I don't have a spell snare, so I'm like, well, this is going to be trouble. Cycle the Lord Revealed and go and get a Watery Grave. Go to my turn, cast a Consider off the Sink into Stupor, flip over something dead, draw into a Blood Chief's Thirst. Like, all right, cool. Play my my Watery Grave, Blood Chief's Thirst, the Brood Scale. I'm like, all right, at least I'm not dying this turn. They follow up with, I think, a Malevolent Rumble that I had found a Force of Negation for. So I force that, and they're forced to go like basic forest, ancient stirrings. Like, okay, sucks for me, but we'll figure it out. Go back to my turn. I think I play out like a Murktide or Thoughtseize them. They've got another Brood Scale in hand, a Flesh Raker, and like a Walking Ballista. Take the other Brood Scale so I'm not getting comboed. Play out the Murktide, pass. Or it might have been a Frog. I think they got a... Man, it's like minor little detail decisions that don't matter that much, but they're there. I think they might have gotten a Cavern of Souls, and I played out a Frog and just started like ditching counter spells to the Frog. Either way, played out a Frog one turn and a Murktide the next turn. So the board state's like still the same. It had to have been the Frog first because I pitched a bunch of counter spells the next turn to be able to play the Murktide, and ended up just having a lethal attack in the air the turn after while my opponent like couldn't find another Brood Scale. Sideboarding against them. Harbinger's coming in. The EE comes in. Consign to Memory comes in. Usually I'll bring in a couple copies of Stern Scolding. They have Cavern of Souls, so I don't want to go overboard on counters. But Stern Scoldings does like the same job as Counterspell, but more efficiently. Paying 1 mana to counter like a Flesh Raker or Brood Scale or something like that instead of paying 2. Nihil Spellbomb, if they're on like a Traverse build or an Emrakul heavy build, can come in. But if they're not on those, I'm usually leaving it on the sideline. And then Toxic Deluge, in theory, is cool. In practice, I think if they're making a bunch of spawns, they're just like going off that turn. So you don't have a chance really to Deluge. Sideboarding out. Force Negation gets trimmed pretty aggressively. They are like a creature heavy combo, and they can saga up the Blade of the Blood Chief. So Force isn't as interactive. Trim some counter spells because, again, Consign, Stern Scolding do like the same job but more efficiently. Bowmaster is getting aggressively cut. It kind of absolutely sucks. And then the last spot could just be like an extra Tameo, something like that. That's not interacting in the early games. I don't really want to waste mana on it over something like Consign or Stern Scolding that is. Game 2, I remember there being a bunch of sagas, like 2 sagas, and opponent ended up killing me with a Walking Ballista. They didn't combo. They just had like a 2/2 Ballista and a Blade of the Blood Chief, and I was having to like trade my guy off whatever I had, like a Psychic Frog, with something that was attacking on their side. So they were getting more blade triggers. I think I was having to chump block a Construct token with a Psychic Frog. So they were just getting like more blade triggers, and eventually I was just like dead to the Walking Ballista. So went back to game 3. I remember this one pretty vividly because opponent starts on a Beseiju and a Delighted Halfling. My opening hand is just like 3 removal spells, like double Fatal Push, shoot the Sheriff or something. A Harbinger, 2 lands, and then like a consign, I believe. And so I drew, killed the halfling, passed back. My opponent plays a Blade of the Blood Chief, misses their second land drop. I'm like, all right, this is good for me. I've got consign for a brood scale. I've got some removal spells. I play second land, go. They play a second Blade of the Blood Chief, pass back. I draw, play my third land. I played my third land and passed again. No, they must not have played the blade that turn. That must have just been a pass turn, because I drew, played my third land, cast a Harbinger. I was like, I hope they don't have the Dismember right here. Cast Harbinger. They responded with a Veil of Summer and drew their card. Harbinger resolved, went to their turn. They didn't have a second land still, passed, like played a second Blade of the Blood Chief, passed back. I top deck an Engineered Explosives on 1. Play it, hit with Harbinger, pass back. They do nothing and pass. I blow up the 2 Blade of the Blood Chiefs on the board. And at that point, it's just like, find a Murktide, play it out, Stubborn Denial, a Dismember that they do top deck at a point where they have to kill the Murktide or they're dead to it. So Harbinger just like goes coast to coast pretty much. Just able to lock them out of making green or colorless, because all they had was the Beseiju. But they did miss the second land drop for the entire game. So Harbinger definitely showing up, but a more extreme job than I would have thought it would be. So either way, beat Broodscale, which is a beatable matchup, but not the easiest in the world. So glad to have that one taken out. The 6th round, I'm at 4-1-1. So 4-1. Yeah, because the bye counts as a win. 4-1. Intentional draw with Eldrazi Tron to make it into top 8. I'm the 6th seed going into top 8. So going to be on the draw. Round 1, the quarterfinals, round 1 of top 8. I get paired against the same Orzhov opponent I played round 1 of the entire event. Game 1, they just did normal Orzhov things like turn 2 Bale Merc on the play. I don't have an answer for it. Turn 3 Flicker Wisp, get the Bale Merc back. I still don't have an answer. And just run away with it from there. I think they had like double Aven Interrupter, and I just couldn't interact very well. Game 2, I already talked about the sideboarding considerations. I was thinking a little bit more about them going for a fair game plan instead of Overlord game 2 and 3, like respecting Ephemerate a bit more. So I think I didn't board one of my counter spells back in on the play, and instead kept a Force Negation in just to have an extra answer to a Vial on 1 or an Ephemerate instead of an Overlord. And it kind of paid off. I think they went like turn 2 Felia. I let them have that. Turn 3, they didn't play an Overlord. I got to kill the Felia into turn. I think they might have played another one. Either way, I remember the game came down to them getting an Overlord into play and going to Flicker Wisp it, and I consigned the Flicker Wisp return trigger. If you don't know, when Flicker Wisp or Felia exile a permanent, at the end of turn, it creates another trigger that basically says when the turn ends, return that permanent. You can consign that return trigger. And so whatever they got rid of, whatever they present to exile, just stays in exile. So a lot of times Overlord becomes like draw 1, and then you consign the return trigger, and it's just gone forever. You don't have to deal with it anymore, which is really, really huge. But game 2 just kind of came down to That play getting the Overlord off the battlefield, a Bowmaster killing off the Flicker Wisp, and I was finally able to resolve like a 7/7 Murktide and just swing 2 or 3 times to win the game with it. Game 3, they started on turn 1 Aether Vial, turn 2 Thoughtseize, second Aether Vial. And I was like, okay, well, we're doomed. Good luck. We tried. And then I think for over the next like 7 turns, they drew maybe 2 creatures. They drew an Emperor of Bones that I had a removal spell for. They drew a Flicker Wisp that I had a Consign and a Bowmaster for. This was like after I had played a Murktide out. And they drew, I think, a Felia that I had a removal spell for. But either way, they had a few, or no, they had an Emperor of Bones and a Boggart Trawler. And I was able to Toxic Deluge away both of those. Then they found a Felia. I Fatal Pushed it. There was a turn they drew a blind card, played out a land, passed back, and I drew or had a Murktide in hand and finally decided like I'm just going to tap out. I think I had like 4 cards in the yard, 3 lands. I'm going to tap out, play this Murktide. They've got 5 lands. I pray they don't hit a bow or a Overlord or a Solitude. Passed back. They drew, kind of sighed, played out a land and passed. And from then on out, I just had like Consign, Bowmaster, Fatal Push, Shoot the Sheriff, and was just never tapping off of anything. And the Murktide was able to swing through in like 3 turns. Murktide definitely a lot better against the Vile versions and not as good against the Ketchermos Relic versions. So recognizing that, I kept some Murktides in, where against the Ketchermos versions, I'm likely cutting all of them. So got to get my round 1 of the top 8 rematch win. Big deal, beating Orzhov. On to round 2. I'm pretty sure someone told me what my round 2 opponent was playing, and I just completely forgot. I thought they were on Prowess. So I kept a hand with like Psychic Frog, 2 lands, Fatal Push, Force of Negation, Spell Snare. It was like this hand just wrecks Prowess. And I'm on the play. I go turn 1 land pass, and my opponent goes Boseiju Arboreal Grazer. I'm like, this is not Prowess. So they put in a bounce land, pick up their first one. I play out a turn 2 Frog. They have a Spelunking. I untap, like kill the Grazer, get an attack with the Frog. Just trying to find interaction for a Titan. End up whiffing that turn, and they play in Azusa. I'm like, oh, well, I don't have Revolt for this Fatal Push. I've got a Force of Negation. I've got a Spell Snare. I might have had a Bowmaster at that point. Something like that. Just like nothing that's interacting with Azusa. And they play their extra 2 lands. I draw and find it. It was either off the draw for turn or the hit off the Frog. I find a counter spell. So I'm like, all right, I can counter a Titan. This is good. They've got a Saga that's going to be coming off suspend in a couple turns, or a Saga that's going to be cracking in a couple turns. So I can counterspell this Titan, get another attack next turn, maybe find another counter. Either way, do that, hit them. They go to their turn, play a Titan, and I counterspell. I'm like, all right, this feels okay. I don't have a big Frog. It's like a 3/4, but I'm drawing some cards. I still haven't found a fetch land to kill this Azusa, but I've got a Frog living. They crack their Saga and go and get an Expedition map. And I'm like, okay, they can get an Otawara, but they don't currently have blue mana. They have a Gruul Turf in hand that I know about, and they have no blue sources on the battlefield. It's like double Crumbling Vestige, a Selesnya Sanctuary, something else. No blue sources on the battlefield. So I'm like, I don't know what they're going to get, but I'm okay at the moment. They get a Shifting Woodlands. And I'm like, shit. They have a Titan in the graveyard that I just counterspelled. They have Delirium off of like a Titan, what's it called? Urza's Saga, and an Explore plus like an Expedition map. So they have Delirium in the graveyard. Kind of cooked if they activate this Saga next turn, or if they activate this Shifting Woodlands. So I can look for a Shoot the Sheriff or a Cling to Dust. Those are my only outs. I throw a couple more cards in Frog, attack in, find a fetch land for the Fatal Push, but don't find a Shoot the Sheriff or a Cling to Dust. So I was like, okay, well, I'm dead, super dead to this Titan. Pass back. My opponent draws, tanks for a second, and goes Summoner's Pact. I'm like, looking at my hand, I've got a counterspell. I've drawn a second counterspell. And I'm looking at my hand. I'm like, I could counterspell this Summoner's Pact, but if I do that, they're going to go for the Shifting Woodlands. So I let the Summoner's Pact resolve. They go and get a Titan, cast the Titan. I'm like, oh, thank God. Counterspell the Titan, go to my turn, hit with Frog again, play out my fetch land, pass the turn. On their upkeep, they tap out, including the Shifting Woodlands, because it's like Woodlands, Crumbling Vestige, or Bounce Land, something like that, to pay for Pact. And after they pay, I go, all right, cool, fetch, Fatal Push the Azusa. They draw for turn, and they can't make enough mana, can't play enough to Woodlands back the Titan. They can't play a new Titan, so end up winning game one because of that. And we talked about it afterwards, and opponent was like, yeah, absolutely should have Shifting Woodlands the Titan. I was trying to play around X, didn't play around Y. I don't really know what they were trying to play around by not Shifting Woodlandsing the Titan, but either way, they had something in mind that they wanted to play around. Game two, I'm pretty sure was like, they had all colorless sources for the first 4 or 5 turns, like Mirror Pool, Crumbling Vestige, Urza's Saga, maybe a second Saga, some other colorless land like a Cavern of Souls, and I didn't really have much going on. I think I had like a Thoughtseize into counter a Spelunking when they went for the Crumbling Vestige into, I might have had like a turn 4 Frog, trying to find a Harbinger. And eventually I was able to find a Harbinger, get it down, like lock them out of the game completely. They couldn't find a Dismember or Otawar or anything. And it was just like Frog plus a Harbinger attacking in and getting the game over with. And I think I ended that one with like a couple counter spells and a Consign or no. The way that one ended was they found a way to kill my Harbinger. I had Frog down. I tapped all but one for a Murktide when they had 6 mana open with like a Tireless Tracker and something else. Had all but one available for, or tapped all but one for a Murktide. Passed back. They made a comment about playing the wrong land last turn. Played a bounce land. Got their second green. Cast a Titan, and I consigned the Titan ETB trigger. And then went to my turn, flew the Frog, attacked him with both for lethal. So it was a bit of a fortunate situation of like having enough pressure to take advantage of killing them the turn that Titan came down. Because I did not have a counterspell and I did not have an answer to the Titan. So lucky there. But that's kind of how the matchup goes. You just have one or two turns that you really need to pay or play around your opponent doing something explosive and you not losing the game because you got too ambitious or too greedy in that one turn. But either way, won that one, made it to the finals. There was no change in prize between first and second place, 2 invites. So split everything, split like the payout, the prize pool for top 4. Top 2 got the invites. There's no lanyard or anything. So we ended up just playing for fun. They were actually on Sultai Oculus, but with like 1 copy of Rakshasa's Bargain. And I think it was like game 1, I mulled to 5 with 2 no landers. They had turn 1 Tameo. I didn't have a removal spell. They had turn 2 Frog. I found a fatal push, went to push the Frog. They've had force and negation and just like ran away with it from there. And I think game 2 was like a mulligan into I got out of Murktide. They had Sink into Stupor. They untapped, played a Kaito. I recast my Murktide with no counters. They just like stunned down my Murktide, attacked, played a Frog, and game like wasn't even close. But they were playing Emperor of Bones, a bunch of Graveyard Trespassers, Unearth Oculus, Frog Kaito, some number of Bowmasters, Tameos. Like, I don't think I was winning that one in a million years. But thankfully, we'd split and everything, so it didn't really matter, just for fun. Changes I would make to the deck going forward. First off, Tameo. I think Tameo is cool. I would have been happier if the Tameo was just like another Thoughtseize or 2. Would have done the same job as eating a removal spell, but more guaranteed. So I think I would trim the 3rd Tameo for the 3rd Thoughtseize. The other 2 Tameo, I really liked Lorien Revealed. I might want to go to like a 2nd Lorien Revealed. I know I was trying out 3 recently. Ended up playing 2 because I didn't want to overdo it on a test card. But I could very well see cutting like the 1 Tameo for a Lorien Revealed, 1 for a Thoughtseize, and then the 3rd one for just like a 2nd Stubborn Denial. Bowmaster, if I'm not seeing the mirror match, I want to cut Bowmaster. I think it's the mirror and the mirror, blue-white control, and Hollow One are the only matchups I want it against. It's okay against Boros, but with like Voice of Victory popping up, it's a lot less good than it has been. So if I could find a way to cut Bowmaster, I would. But Tameo, I think definitely underperformed unless you consider being a lightning rod for removal to be worth it. If you do, by all means, play Tameo. But I think I can do a better job of interacting in a more versatile manner than have something that's a lightning rod for removal when a bunch of decks in the format like don't even run removal. So that's my thought there. Sideboard I was pretty happy with. EE showed up. Deluge showed up. The 3rd Stern Scolding feels a little heavy, so I'd probably cut the 3rd Scolding for something. Off the top of my head, it could be a Jace if you just want another Planeswalker, but since I'm already thinking of like trimming Bowmaster Kaito, I don't really want another 4-mana sorcery speed play. 3rd Harbinger would be perfectly reasonable if you're seeing a bunch of Saga stuff. So those are kind of the big changes. Just the Tameo for some more interaction and the 3rd Stern Scolding for like another Harbinger. Other than that, pretty happy about the list. Happy about how it performed. I think a lot of the wins came down to having the tools available to interact how I wanted to interact, like having the ability to keep some amount of 1-landers because of Lorien Revealed, having to shoot the sheriff over like another dismember, winning a game against Titan, having some amount of thought seize in the main, the extra removal spell against stuff like Brood Scale. And yeah, pretty pleased about it. So if you're thinking about running into an RCQ in the upcoming week or so, and you see a bunch of prowess in the room, consider the list. I think it's got some merit to it, and I think it can serve you well. Other than that, if you all enjoy the video, again, don't forget to leave a like. Maybe consider subscribing to the channel. Greatly helps out. And hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. I will catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.